Space, the final frontier. A vast, silent ocean stretching beyond imagination. Beautiful in ways that can bring tears to your eyes, and terrifying in ways that words can barely capture. Out there, beyond the thin veil of our atmosphere, there is no sound, no air, no comfort. Only the infinitely large deep blackness. And if you've been following along here on Chilling True Tales, you already know the paranormal shares that same dual nature. It can be awe-inspiring, almost beautiful, but just as quickly it can turn into something deeply unsettling, something that clings to your thoughts long after the story ends. Now ask yourself this: what happens when you combine the two? The infinite emptiness of space and the unexplainable nature of the paranormal, things beyond our understanding. What kind of horror does that create? Like all the other stories on this channel, these stories are not fiction. They are formally documented accounts, reported by trained professionals, astronauts, cosmonauts, and mission specialists. People chosen for their discipline, their intelligence, their psychological resilience. People who are not prone to fantasy or fear. And yet, even they could not escape what they encountered. Faced with that endless deep blackness of space, and so far away from the Earth, they still could not escape the creepy and the weird, and I will retell them in turn. The paranormal will not rest, not even in space, and neither will we in seeking out real life, chilling true tales, wherever they may be. Space Snake. Dr. Story Musgrave is an impressive person with an impressive resume and work experience history. He has 6 academic degrees in mathematics, chemistry, literature, physiology, operations analysis, and a medical degree. As a former member of the US Marine Corps and a cardiovascular and exercise physiology expert, he was handpicked by NASA to join their ranks as an astronaut. There, he not only trained as an astronaut, but designed life support systems and even spacesuits. He sounds like a very intelligent and logical person, right? For NASA, he had recorded 6 space flights, which made him an experienced and accomplished astronaut. In 1995, he shared his creepy space experience in an interview, telling the world something that he had never shared before, not even with NASA. He said,
"On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there."
A snake. Not debris, not a reflection, not a trick of the light bouncing off the hole, but a snake. He described it in unsettling detail.
6, 7, maybe even 8 feet long. It is rubbery because it has internal waves in it, and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there. And that sort of thing brings to you, really, a certainty that other living creatures are out there.
Its body didn't move the way a solid object should. Instead, it rippled, almost as if waves were passing through it from the inside. A strange, fluid motion like something alive, but not bound by the rules of biology as we understand them. Rubbery, undulating and moving with intent. He had never officially informed NASA at the time of it happening either, maybe for fear of it affecting his strong reputation. However, he eventually did tell the world. This raises certain questions. Just what exactly did he see? And to see it twice on 2 different missions? And what other things was he referring to that you see out there? I'm not sure that Dr. Musgrave ever elaborated on his experience, but the idea of an alien snake propelling itself around the Earth and following Earth astronauts around is quite unsettling. These events turn the logical, well-educated, and practical Dr. Musgrave into a man who was convinced, about the presence of life in outer space. The Knock. Yang Liwei was China's first astronaut. He had proudly served in the Chinese Air Force prior to being sent into space. His outstanding skill and experience were demonstrated with him having more than 1,300 flight hours under his belt. He holds a bachelor's degree from the Air Force Second Flight Academy, as well as a PhD in management from Tsinghua University. He had also spent 5 years studying the science and operation of spacecraft, with a view to one day going to space. At this time, he also undertook the physical and psychological training that was required to be able to take on such a demanding task. His success, his calm and professional demeanour, his experience and knowledge were the reasons that he was picked from over 1,500 potential candidates to join in the space mission as a taikonaut, the Chinese equivalent of an astronaut. In 2003, he was included on China's first manned space mission on the Shenzhou 5, where he was scheduled to spend several hours in space. He successfully launched into space and conducted his mission. It was during the mission, however, that he was sitting in his space shuttle when he suddenly reported that he heard knocking. Confused, he looked around for a source, but couldn't find one, and after some investigation, concluded that there was no hardware malfunction or issue with the craft that would cause the noise. He heard it again, and this time he stopped cold, because what he was experiencing was impossible. It sounded as if the knocking was coming from outside of the craft. He described it as
someone knocking the body of the spaceship, just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer.
He searched around for an answer, but could not explain it, and did not see anyone or anything outside the craft. Just the haunting knocking, as if someone were looking to be invited in. Now, even if we were to write this event off as some mistake by Young, or a random occurrence, we run into some trouble because he isn't alone in this strange experience. There have been other Chinese taikonauts that ran missions between the years of 2005 to 2008, who also reported to have heard similar knocking sounds from outside of the shuttles. Just like Yang Liwei, they thought someone was knocking from the outside of the craft, but of course, no one was there. And let's ramp up this creepiness just one more notch. As you may or may not know, there's no sound in space. There's no air to carry sound. That means that the knocking sounds couldn't have even been random noises from outside the craft. The sounds could only be made in one of two ways. Either from something knocking on the sides of the craft from inside of it, or something perhaps deliberately making direct contact with the craft itself. Both possibilities are equally terrifying. Strange space music. In 1969, NASA launched the Apollo 10 mission into space with 3 astronauts. The mission was intended as a test run for the first manned mission to the moon, and this mission's aim was essentially a trial run to circle around the moon. The astronauts took different kinds of equipment for conducting tests in space. Launching off successfully from Kennedy Space Center on 18th of May 1969, the Apollo 10 mission crew got to work as soon as they were clear in space. Among them, Lieutenant Tom Stafford, a highly decorated test pilot and graduate of the US Naval Academy with a Bachelor of Science degree with honors. There was also a highly experienced pilot, Eugene Cernan, with a degree in science and aeronautical engineering and lengthy experience as a naval aviator. And John Young, with a degree in aeronautical engineering with the highest honors and a US Navy veteran with vast experience as a naval aviator. Up until about day 4 of the mission, everything was going quite well, when suddenly Much to the surprise of the astronauts, they could hear a strange, sort of rhythmic whistling on their headphones. They described it to mission control as space music. This played for about 1 hour through their headsets as they tried to identify the source with mission control, and they even joked around about it. This was no random interference in their opinion, with Commander Cernan even saying,
"That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound?"
with Pilot Young at one stage saying, despite their investigations and the near impossibility that there could be any music in space, it persisted. Later on, as the sound continued, Cernan further commented,
"Boy, that sure is weird music." No.
this sound baffled many for decades, and it is still a mystery, with some putting it down to radio interference. But you'd think that these three men, with their wealth of experience between them, would certainly know the difference. For your benefit, I have included the shortened parts of the actual recording here. Strange lights and spheres. This strange event occurred to Major General Vladimir Kovalyanok, Doctor of Military Sciences and a highly experienced Soviet Air Force pilot who was selected to be a cosmonaut as early as 1967. Spaceflight is not without its challenges, of course, one of which is muscle atrophy. In the weightlessness of space, the human body loses its need to retain muscle mass, and muscles start to shrink and fade away. To combat this, all space travellers must exercise regularly to prevent muscle atrophy. On May 5, 1981, while on a space mission with Viktor Petrovich Savinik, a technical scientist and a geodesy and cartography graduate, Vladimir had just finished doing his exercises in the Salyut orbital space station when he decided to look out a porthole. What he witnessed outside shook him. Travelling alongside the station, he witnessed something that he simply could not explain. Now, keep in mind as you listen to his words that this was his third space mission, and he had done this all before. This mission was certainly not his longest. His prior mission in 1978 had lasted for over 139 days. He said,
"Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years I never spoke on such things. The encounter you ask me about happened on May 5th, 1981, at about 6 p.m. during the Salyut mission. At that time, we were over the area of South Africa, moving towards the area of the Indian Ocean. I just made some gymnastic exercises when I saw in front of me, through a porthole, an object which I could not explain. I saw this object, and then something happened that I could not explain, something impossible according to the laws of physics."
Kovalyanok clearly had seen something unexplainable with his own eyes. He gave a very detailed account of what he saw next.
"The object had this shape, elliptical, and flew with us. From a frontal view, it looked like it would rotate in flight direction. It only flew straight. But then a kind of explosion happened, very beautiful to watch, of golden light. This was the first part. Then, 1 or 2 seconds later, a second explosion followed somewhere else, and 2 spheres appeared, golden and very beautiful. After this explosion, I just saw white smoke, then a cloud-like sphere. Before we entered the darkness, we flew through the terminator, the twilight zone between day and night. We flew eastwards, and when we entered the darkness of the earth shadow, I could not see them any longer. The 2 spheres never returned."
Just what did the Major General see up there? Were there intelligences flying other craft? Or was he simply imagining it all, but in great detail? Russian cosmonaut films UFO. Soviet Azerbaijani astronaut Musa Manarov was no stranger to the unknown. A highly qualified engineer, space equipment tester, and experimental analyst, he spent an extraordinary 541 days in space over the course of his career. This wasn't a man prone to imagination or panic. This was someone trained to observe, measure, and understand. But in 1991, something happened that even his experience couldn't explain. At the time, Manarov was en route to the Mir space station, a mission that for him was routine. Just another journey into the silent, infinite darkness of space. His focus was on procedures, instruments, and mission objectives. Until suddenly, something outside of his spacecraft caught his attention. At first it was just a shape, something that didn't quite belong. Floating there, against the endless black backdrop, was what he later described as a cigar-shaped object. Manarov didn't just glance at it, he watched it. For nearly 2 full minutes, he observed the object closely. Long enough to study its movement, long enough to question what he was seeing, and long enough to reach for his camera and record it. According to his account, the object behaved in ways that defied simple explanation. It would light up intermittently, almost as if it were reacting to something unseen. Then, without warning, it began to move. Not drifting like debris, not tumbling like space junk, but changing direction, deliberately. And then, in a final strange motion, it spiraled away into the cosmos, vanishing into the vast emptiness. No collision, no visible propulsion, no obvious explanation. Now, here's where things get complicated. In space, perception is deceptive. Without a fixed frame of reference, judging size, speed, and distance becomes incredibly difficult, even for trained astronauts. What looks massive could be tiny, and what seems close could be miles away. Because of this, skeptics have offered a more grounded explanation, that what Manarov saw was nothing more than space debris. Perhaps a fragment of a satellite or discarded equipment catching sunlight at odd angles and creating the illusion of controlled movement. But Manarov has consistently rejected that idea. He has stated, more than once, that what he observed did not behave like space junk. Not in its motion, not in its light, and not in the way it seemed to move and respond to its surroundings. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Do we trust the interpretation of a highly trained astronaut, an engineer with over 541 days in space, someone who understands the behaviour of objects in orbit better than most people on Earth? Or do we side with the skeptics who argue that even experts can misinterpret what they see in such an alien environment? And here's perhaps the most intriguing part of all. Manarov spent over 1.5 years in space across multiple missions. Yet, this is the only truly unexplained event that he ever reported. There was no pattern of reports, no repeated sightings, just this one moment. So, ask yourself, did Manarov see something extraordinary that we can't explain? Or was it simply something ordinary, seen in extraordinary conditions? Now, for the podcast listeners, there is a video version of this podcast on our YouTube channel if you would like to see the footage at some stage. Gordon Cooper's multiple sightings. When we talk about credible UFO witnesses, few names carry the same weight as Gordon Cooper. Cooper wasn't just a pilot. He was one of NASA's original astronauts, a man chosen at the very dawn of the space age. Before that, he built a reputation in the United States Air Force as a calm, highly disciplined aviator with exceptional skills under pressure. He held a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Engineering and trained at the elite US Air Force Experimental Flight Test School, where only the best were selected to push aircraft and themselves to the limit. This was a man grounded in science, precision and procedure, and yet, throughout his career, Cooper would make claims that sit far outside conventional explanation. In 1951, long before he even left the Earth's atmosphere, Cooper reported something extraordinary. While flying with fellow aircraft pilots, he claimed they witnessed what he described as a vast armada of UFOs, objects flying in formation at extremely high altitudes. Not one object, not two, but many, moving together with coordination. Years later, while stationed in Germany during the 1950s, Cooper described another encounter. This time, the objects were metallic, wingless, and flying over their base. What struck him the most wasn't just their appearance, it was their behaviour. They flew in formation similar to fighter jets, almost as if mimicking human aircraft, but with capabilities far beyond them. Sudden changes in direction, speeds that defied the limits of known aviation at the time, and movements that simply didn't align with the physics that the pilots were trained to understand. These weren't just random lights in the sky. To Cooper, they were controlled and intentional. Fast forward to 1963. Now no longer just a pilot, Cooper was an astronaut aboard Mercury Atlas 9, orbiting Earth inside a small capsule named Faith 7. The mission was historic. He would circle the planet multiple times, becoming the last American to fly solo in space. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, until the final orbit. As Cooper passed over Perth in Australia, something unexpected appeared outside his capsule window. A glowing, green, spherical object. It wasn't stationary, it wasn't drifting. It was moving towards him, rapidly, closing distance at a speed that immediately caught his attention. This wasn't just a trick of the light or a passing reflection, because back on Earth, the Muir tracking station picked it up too. He had radar confirmation. Something was definitely there. For a brief moment, both man and machine were witnessing the same unexplained phenomenon. After completing his mission, Cooper returned safely back to Earth. The mission itself was declared a success, but the story didn't end there. Cooper reported the incident to the National Broadcasting Company. Yet, according to the account, journalists were allegedly instructed not to question him about the sighting. And just like that, the story faded. In later records, Cooper appeared to downplay or deny the UFO sighting during his space mission. Whether this was due to pressure, reinterpretation, or something else entirely, remains unclear. But here's where things take an even more intriguing turn. Despite the apparent retraction, Cooper never abandoned his broader beliefs. For the rest of his life, he remained outspoken, insisting that extraterrestrial craft were real and that governments were actively covering up evidence of their existence. He didn't just whisper these ideas, he spoke about them openly, right up until his death in 2004. One question remains. If it wasn't true, why would someone like Gordon Cooper risk his reputation to speak about such things? And ultimately, we are left wondering if he was telling the truth and why the story was made to go quiet. Strange lights. On his fourth space mission, astronaut Leroy Chow, a qualified chemical engineer, engineering consultant, and expert in materials, had an experience that he just couldn't explain. What's more, this experience terrified him. During a spacewalk on the International Space Station in 2005, He and cosmonaut Salizan Sharapov were installing navigation antennas on the ISS. Now, while on spacewalks, the flight crew are at their most vulnerable. This is because they're exposed to the exterior of the ISS where anything can go wrong. Risks of exposure, debris, and accidents are very high. Now, obviously the astronauts are in their spacesuits, but the astronauts are held safe only by their tethers that keep them from drifting away into space from the ISS, which incidentally is moving at about 27,000 kilometers per hour over the Earth. While trying to complete the work they were doing, suddenly Chow looked up to see 5 lights fly past them, and he claimed that they zoomed past in an upside-down checkmark formation. This was not debris. This was not a random illusion. There were 5 lights in perfect formation zooming past him outside the ISS. He said that his heart leapt into his throat as fear overcame him. His mind raced as he scrambled to rationalize what he had just seen, and try as he may, he could not explain the lights, and he immediately contacted Mission Control. Now, Mission Control tried to identify those lights, but they just couldn't. Unfortunately, his colleague Sharapov was facing another direction, and he did not see the lights. Now, try as they may, Mission Control did not capture the lights on the ISS cameras either. Incidentally, sometime after this on his return to Earth, Chow tried very hard to rationalize it, and eventually concluded that it must have been lights from fishing boats on Earth. However, there are no fishing boats outside the ISS in space. Was he just trying to make sense of something that he just couldn't understand? Or maybe something that just terrified him beyond belief? Whatever his motives or whatever his reasons, topping it all off, in 2023, Leroy Chow had another incident, but this time it wasn't space related. And I thought it's worth mentioning. Flying in his private jet over Houston, the former space shuttle commander described what he saw as 2 perfectly smooth and shiny spheres, each roughly 3 feet or 91 centimeters in diameter, ripped by him in a mere 6 meters away from his plane. He first detailed this unusual encounter with a news outlet, and since that time he has elaborated just a little bit in subsequent interviews, and every time he does, it sparks debate about the presence of UFOs. About this encounter, he said,
"There was nothing around me other than the panhandle of Texas at 9,000 feet on this instrument flight plan, and just suddenly these things appeared. They came right at me."
The Lost Cosmonaut Recordings. The space race was hot in the 1960s during the Cold War between the US and the USSR, with both sides scrambling for not only the technology to be able to get into space, but also the bragging rights. The Russians launched the first man-made artificial satellite into space and called it Sputnik. Its job basically was to circle the Earth and transmit a signal back. Around that time, the Giudica Cordiglia brothers from Italy, who were amateur radio operators, had been buying and repairing broken radio receivers when the USSR Sputnik's launch was announced, and they were keen to try to tune in to hear some of that transmission. Eventually they managed to pick up on the broadcast. It was faint, but unmistakable, and it was a beeping sound coming from space. This was the sound of Sputnik. Now, it may not sound like much, but imagine being able to tune in and hear the first ever man-made object sent into space. From that moment on, the brothers became more and more enthusiastic about receiving signals from space, to the point of obsession. Night and day, they'd tinker with their radio equipment, and the roof of their parents' apartment building began to bristle with homemade antennas. With every new space launch, the brothers listened in, capturing radio transmission from Sputnik 1, 2, and then Explorer 1 in 1958. On November 3rd, 1957, they received signals from Sputnik 2, with some strange sounds, which was found to be the heartbeat of the dog Laika, the first living being to be sent by humans into space. It was in this way the Giudica Cordiglia brothers were able to follow each announced space launch and marvel in awe at the sounds from space. In February 1958, they also detected signals from Explorer 1, the first American satellite to be placed in orbit. But then, on November 28, 1960, the brothers intercepted a transmission that changed everything. It was not a thing they expected to hear, nor did they understand it, but nevertheless, it was there. It was picked up on one of the Soviet frequencies, but there hadn't been a launch announcement for any new satellites. It was on this occasion that instead of picking up on the standard beeps and bleeps as they'd heard from all the other satellites, they intercepted what sounded like an SOS call in Morse code. Three dots, three dashes, three dots, and transmitted from a craft that was apparently moving away from the Earth. It's worth noting that by this point the Soviets had already launched a dog, Laika, into space, but neither the Soviets nor the Americans had managed to get a human beyond the stratosphere. However, this transmission sounded like it was being sent by a human in a craft in space. It just didn't make any sense, and it was utterly terrifying because it potentially meant that a cosmonaut was in the process of being flung the whole way into the endless oblivion of space. It could also have meant that the Soviets had managed to launch a human into orbit for the first time in history, so why the secrecy around it? Unmanned crafts would have no need to send a distress signal, so confused, the brothers thought that it must have been a mistake at first. But the signal persisted for a time. For the brothers, this was the first in a series of mysterious Mayday calls that they intercepted from space. On February 2nd, in 1961, at about 10:55 p.m. local time, they intercepted a broadcast that sounded like someone suffocating. They recorded what they were convinced was a human heartbeat, transmitted as biometric data. Unsure of what the sound was, the story goes that the brothers took it to Professor Dogliotti, a cardiologist at the University of Turin, where one of them was a student. The professor stated,
"This is the heart of a dying man."
If these transmissions weren't creepy enough, something even more terrifying happened when they received a mysterious broadcast in Russian from a woman begging for help on the broadcast. This particularly haunting message was intercepted by the brothers on May 17, 1961, without any indication from who or from where it came. In that message, some counting can be heard, with a woman yelling, "Come in, come in. Listen, come in. Talk to me, it's very hot. Is this dangerous? I feel very hot. I can see flames. Am I going to crash?" I have supplied the original audio here. Listen to how distressed this woman sounds. Strangely, the Soviet Union announced only one successful manned mission, which was that of Yuri Gagarin on April 12, 1961. And the first woman to be declared to have been sent into space wasn't until Valentina Tereshkova on June 16, 1963 on Vostok 6. Did the Russians lose people secretly in space and then cover it all up? Or were the Judica Cordiglia brothers history's best hoaxes? Without official information from Russia either way, we can only speculate. And just like all the mysteries of space, they will likely remain unanswered, unexplained, and unbelievably creepy.